is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. A couple of late reports on the Reagan economy today sent up warning flags for the incoming Bush administration. The government said that retail sales in 1988 rose at the sharpest rate in 4 years. And another report indicated you, the consumer, may be paying more for what you buy this year. Richard Schlesinger reports.
Figures released today sparked a debate over whether the economy is in danger of overheating. The retail sales figures for 1988 showed consumer spending increased faster last year than any year since 1984. $1.61 trillion went into retail cash registers, up nearly 7% over the previous year.
Economic growth is perhaps too strong at the present time. We're putting more and more pressure on labor and on productive capacity, and inevitably that means higher inflation in 1989.
Some private sector economists like Jones fear inflation will rise quickly because the Producer Price Index, also released today, shows wholesale prices increased 4% last year. When wholesale prices rise, that means consumers eventually pay more for goods, and inflation goes up.
There is a little bit of evidence that inflation might be picking up slightly, but I would emphasize only slightly.
Wholesale prices rose across the board in December. Tobacco, women's clothes, household appliances, and cars, among other products, all up. Some economists believe the wholesale price figures released today could mean inflation this year will run at more than 7%, up from the current level of around 5%.
And it's likely to lead in the future, in 1989, to tighter credit and higher interest rates.
Well, despite the debate over how quickly the economy is heating up, all signs are that the government will eventually push for higher interest rates. Nobody doubts the economy is strong. The question is, how much of a good thing is too much of a good thing? Dan?
Thank you, Richard. There's also a growing battle over how much of a good thing is the new expanded Medicare coverage for millions of older Americans. So-called catastrophic health insurance coverage costing billions of dollars took effect the first of the year. CBS News business correspondent Ray Brady reports tonight that some older Americans are now balking at having to help pay for their new coverage and are lobbying hard against it.
The Boston Tea Party seems nothing compared to what will show coming.
Pay no attention.
Let's go, Schlesinger.
Well, we obviously are having some difficulties here, and that's the way it is sometimes with live television. We hope you'll bear with us. Let's move on to the next story. Following years of criticism from Congress and others about lax government enforcement of safety in the American workplace, new federal regulations were issued today. Eric Ingberg reports on the new rules about exposure to hazardous materials on the job.
After 2 years of study, OSHA in one fell swoop slapped regulations on 164 potentially dangerous substances used in manufacturing, which have not before been covered by federal safety standards. OSHA tightened the rules on more than 200 other chemicals, in a move it said would save the lives of 700 workers a year who get cancer, heart disease, or other illnesses from contact with dangerous substances.
Employers will benefit because we estimate that there'll be 55,000 fewer people who get ill as a result from exposures in the workplace.
The rules limiting how much a worker should breathe or touch such common industrial substances as chloroform, carbon monoxide, and perchloroethylene used in dry cleaning mark the first time that OSHA has tried to tackle so many chemical dangers at the same time. The government said 4.5 million workers today are exposed to levels of danger that won't be allowed under the new rules. Industry spokesmen say OSHA is moving too fast.
We have some concerns over how specifically OSHA was able to look at each of those limits and determine their scientific soundness.
On the other side, unions charge the Reagan administration caved in to industry pressures for standards that are easy to meet.
OSHA has generally rubber-stamped the same standards which industry has set for itself. These standards do not really protect workers.
Industries are required to have the new OSHA standards in place by September, but some of the rules are expected to be challenged in court by companies which will charge they are too expensive and unnecessary. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Washington.
Well, before the Friday gremlins got us, we were going to go to Ray Brady for his report on the controversy over expanded Medicare. Here's Ray's report now.
The Boston Tea Party seems nothing compared to what we'll show Congress.
They are senior citizens in revolt, charging that the nation's new catastrophic medical insurance is, for them, a disaster. One that will cost them more in taxes than other Americans pay.
I don't think we got a square deal at all here.
We didn't know about it. They sprung it on us.
To pay for the expanded coverage, Congress slapped a new tax on the elderly. Those with incomes of $15,000 to $20,000 now must pay an extra $78 a year, rising to over $116 by 1993. But as incomes go up, so does the tax. At $40,000, this year's $800 surtax jumps to $1,050.
It is apt to wreck the careful financial planning that I've done all my life.
Washington's been flooded with mail. Many retirees saying 70% of them are already covered by private plans. Some congressmen now want to change the law, although others argue all that mail is from one economic class.
What you're looking at is the wealthier people not wanting to pay the additional premium and wanting it to be more heavily subsidized.
Most of us aren't wealthy, and if we are, so we have a few extra dollars, so what?
The American Association of Retired Persons, the nation's biggest retirement group, supports the new law.
Many people each year, millions, will benefit and be very grateful that this bill was passed.
The AARP no longer represents the seniors on this issue whatsoever.
Still, in an era of multi-billion-dollar deficits, the elderly may be among the first to face a new economic reality.
Those people eligible for the benefits are the people that will be paying for it. That's a change in attitude in this country.
Washington has been trying to figure out all kinds of ways to raise revenues without using the word tax. But the retired may be the first citizens to show that no matter what you call it, they don't want to pay it. Dan?
Thank you, Ray. It's official. Oliver North will never face trial on the two main criminal conspiracy, cover-up, and corruption charges against him in the Weapons for Iran, What Happened to the Money case. Reason? Reagan-Bush administration refusal to supply certain documents needed for the trial. CBS News law correspondent Rita Braver has more on what happened and what might happen next.
The central conspiracy charges against former National Security Council aide Oliver North were formally dropped today. Judge Gerhard Gesell ruling that with the intelligence agencies and the Attorney General refusing to make public key classified information, the court feels it has neither discretion nor legal authority to do anything other than dismiss. North must still face other charges, including obstruction of Congress, and his lawyers and the independent counsel immediately began arguing over his desire to use classified documents in his defense on those counts. Also still an issue, North's subpoenas of President Reagan and President-elect George Bush to testify at trial. Today, the Justice Department moved to quash those subpoenas, saying compelled testimony elicited through direct and cross-examination threatens the dignity and stature of the president. The department argued that during oral testimony, the president risks unwise disclosures that might have adverse effects on the nation's foreign relations.
The prospect of a defendant who is concerned only with saving his own neck, cross-examining left and right on areas that touch on national security is not one that anybody would be happy with, and it's a prospect you can avoid if you submit written questions to the president.
The administration is also expected to fight subpoenas of Secretary of State George Shultz and other top officials. North and his attorneys are expected to fight right back. Rita Braver, CBS News, Washington.
And still to come on the Friday night CBS Evening News, correspondent Betsy Aaron on the new murder capital of the country and why, and Frank Courier on why Trumpeter swans are dying from shots fired decades ago. Rome, where the Vatican was acting as intermediary. Lawrence was one of 2 Americans lost in the 1986 bombing raid on Tripoli. Until today, Libya had said nothing about the fate of the 2 Libyan pilots shot down by U.S. fighters last week. But today, the Libyan ambassador to the UN told CBS News that both Libyan pilots have died. President-elect Bush today gave strong backing and defense to West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who has been backing down and pedaling away from his earlier denials about German involvement with a Libyan chemical plant. Bush said he knows Kohl is, and I quote now, in the forefront in opposing the spread of chemical weapons. In West Germany, a prosecutor has opened a new investigation of the firm suspected of helping Libya's poison gas project. Tom Fenton has that.
The West German government has begun legal action against a company accused by the United States of helping Libya build a chemical weapons plant. Last week, a German government investigator announced there was no case against Imhausen Chemie. The company's president denied doing business with Libya. He said he did not even know where Libya was. The affair has become a major embarrassment for Chancellor Helmut Kohl. After telling the U.S. government to provide some evidence or get off his back, he now admits West German companies may be involved. Kohl previously insisted he knew nothing about German involvement until President Reagan urged him to look into it in mid-November. But that produced no action. The U.S. believes companies in a number of European countries, including this firm in France, have provided equipment for the Libyan plant. The Europeans now seem to be coming around to the American point of view. Their initial reluctance to take the American charges seriously may have stemmed partly from self-interest.
Many of them have considerable trading activities with Libya, and because they don't want to face the nasty dilemmas that are then posed for all of us, if it is true, as I believe it is.
The Allies were also inhibited by concern that the United States was about to repeat its 1986 operation and take direct military action against Libya.
Now that it appears that America is not going to attack Libya, it's much easier for the British and others to come out clearly with the new evidence and say they condemn what the Libyans are doing.
Intelligence experts believe Gaddafi will not be able to complete the plant or begin full-scale production of chemical weapons without substantial foreign help. The administration hopes that help will now be denied. Tom Fenton, CBS News, London.
Last night, we reported to you the story of 6 men who survived 35 days under the earthquake rubble in Armenia. Today, the Soviet news agency that ran the story came in with an aftershock. TASS said it was not able to confirm the story told by a 50-year-old Armenian electrician. TASS said no one was able to find the other 5 men he said were trapped with him for 5 weeks in the basement of a ruined apartment house. The Soviet news agency concluded, everyone loves a miracle.
Wow.
What you eating, babe?
Nothing, honey.
Oh, you can tell me.
The oath of office in a city that now tops a list no community wants to be on. He will take the oath of office as Americans are killing each other with a new kind of random ferocity. What accounts for these soaring murder rates in some cities? Correspondent Betsy Aaron looked at the American bloodbath.
I've never seen the streets of Washington, D.C. more unsafe than they are now.
373 homicides last year, up 65.7% over 1987. You stand a better chance of being killed in Washington than anywhere else in the country. The nation's capital, now the murder capital. But murder is a national problem, up an average 11% across the country.
This time, an unknown assailant or assailants.
The officer was down and holding his hand up.
Bullets don't have names on there when you're shooting at random.
Although Detroit, which was #1 in 1987, dropped slightly, homicide rates went up in half of the nation's cities. Dallas and New York set new records for numbers of murders.
The streets are very dangerous in those areas where drugs are openly sold, because drugs and killing are hand in glove.
For the drug abuser, he's willing to kill to get the drug if necessary. And for the drug trader, the profits are so high for him that he's ready to kill to make the sales.
And in the new culture of drugs and street crime, murder is done to enhance the reputation of the killer. In this undercover tape shot by the district attorney's office in New York, two killers are bragging about their exploits in order to get themselves hired by an undercover cop.
Grabbed him by the neck and tried to slice his throat. The blade. But the nigga was like this, struggling like this, right? And then I came up, tried to stick him in his chest. Boom! Stick him by the heart. Boom, boom, boom.
They are young, violent. I think you can sense from the tape that they are amoral and they have no compunction about killing.
Frustration over ways to end the violence is growing fast, if not faster, than the crime rate.
If we keep handling homicide the way we handle it now, it means that we'll have twice as much crime by the year 2000, and that means we'll spend twice as much money on it.
In Chicago, they're working on a solution. Last year, the police seized 14,000 handguns, and the number of murders, 658, was down slightly.
We embarked upon a goal of trying to disarm the criminal element in the streets, and that is the confiscation of firearms, because anytime you disarm people, you lessen the chances and opportunities for them to commit a homicide.
Lessen, but far from eliminate, the large numbers of murders since the invasion of crack, cheap cocaine. That's what Washington officials blame for their big hike in the number of murders last year.
What the homicide figures seem to be predicting is that unless there's a turnaround in the drug business, crack and then murder may soon be coming to a neighborhood near you. Betsy Aaron, CBS News, New York.
CBS News National Affairs correspondent Lesley Stahl got the first post-election sit-down interview today with Vice President-elect J. Danforth, Dan Quayle. Lesley Stahl asked him about former Vice President Walter Mondale's assessment. Mondale saying that, in his opinion, George Bush now seems to be putting Dan Quayle at a distance, and that Quayle has to move quickly to change his image to avoid, in Mondale's words, going down in history as a national laughingstock.
I think that there was certainly a timeout that we need to take after the campaign. I was not about to rush out and say, let's change things. Now that the campaign is over, let's talk about the new Dan Quayle that everybody wants to talk about. We don't have to make a public affirmation about the team and the closeness of Dan Quayle and George Bush. The people will see that in due time, if they don't already see that right now. For us to sit there and to say that we have to go out and to do something that would be different would be counterproductive.
President-elect George Bush went off fishing in Florida today. Some of what he caught was questions from reporters. CBS News correspondent Mark Phillips was among those asking them.
On his last free weekend before becoming president, George Bush has his priorities straight.
I came down here to go fishing and to relax and not to have yet another news conference because I don't want to overburden you with access.
But shedding the burdens of office isn't easy for the man who will be sworn in as president a week from now. Even here in the Florida sunshine, Mr. Bush could shed his shirt, but not the issues. He talked about Nicaraguan refugees, about chemical weapons, and even before he arrived here, about how some have criticized his cabinet for not having quite the new look he had promised.
If that's the charge, you've picked experienced people. To that charge, I plead guilty.
Yet fishing for the wily bonefish, as he called it, is what Mr. Bush's weekend is supposed to be about. Fishing with his buddies like Senator Alan Simpson and with his longtime guide, George Hummel.
He gets excited when he catches a fish.
George Bush hasn't had too much to get excited about in the 3 fishing trips he's taken since being elected president, at least not while the cameras have been rolling. In Maine, on an earlier trip to Florida, and in Alabama, the only thing Mr. Bush was seen to hook was a tree branch. Still, the sportsman president-elect has been known to catch fish off camera, although he says that's not what counts.
This is a part of my work experience because it's here that I will get new ideas and get creative, clearing the mind of the underbrush.
Mr. Bush says he plans to go fishing often in his presidency to show that he's an environmentalist. His staff says he caught a 13-pounder today.
If you don't get any fish, it's my fault.
But his guide says when the president-elect does hook something, he generally lets it go. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Islamorada, Florida.
They weren't expecting a 70-year-old coach, that's
When
for
we
sure.
last looked at the magnificent birds called Trumpeter swans, it seemed like a success story. That was a couple of years ago. Suddenly, that success is no longer assured. Frank Courier has the Big Bird Watch.
The snow-white trumpeter swan, rare and majestic, largest of all waterfowl in North America, is in trouble again. Nearly hunted to extinction for its feathers a century ago, the trumpeter was on a comeback in its native Minnesota, thriving. Today, it is dying.
25 years ago, it was DDT affecting eagles, ospreys, and peregrines. Now we have lead in marshes affecting various water birds.
Cause of death, lead poisoning. The toll, 17. Another 27 trumpeters are being treated today at the University of Minnesota. All have swallowed lead shotgun pellets. The lead shot was nibbled from lake bottoms, reachable to the long-necked swans for the first time because drought last summer dropped water levels 2 feet.
Quite a number of the birds that we're currently treating are breeding age birds, so that's real significant. That's like losing the colonels and the generals out of your armed forces.
Bird specialists are trying to save the swans. They are x-rayed and injected with drugs to counteract the poison till the pellets can be suctioned through a makeshift 3-foot plastic hose inserted deep down the throat.
You can see this bright white spot is the lead pellet. There's one here and a bunch more here in the stomach. The same principles would apply to a swan that would apply to a human, only it's a little bit longer and a little bit bigger esophagus.
In Minnesota, waterfowl hunters have been using steel shot instead of lead for the past 2 years, but the lead pellets swallowed by the swans had been on the lake bottom 2 decades. The poisonings are a setback to wildlife workers who have spent 3 years building a model trumpeter restoration program.
The problem that we have of lead poisoning and our potential contamination of our wetlands is a problem that may be with us well into the next century and beyond.
The first pair of birds treated and released this morning to the wild will be safe, experts say, only as long as the lakes stay frozen. A spring thaw too small, they worry, might keep water levels shallow and threaten, like a swan song, the trumpeters' comeback to Minnesota. Frank Courier, CBS News, Chicago.
And that's the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather. Bob Schieffer will be here tomorrow, and I'll see you Monday. Good night.
This is CBS.
All this week.